William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
Casey McManaman.
Present.
Chad Cruz.
Present.
Ken Webb.
Present.
Chair, you have a quorum.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. On that basis, I call the meeting to order. First order of business is approval of the minutes of the October 20. Are there any other comments on the minutes? All right, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
And there's
Second.
Seconded, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, thank you. The minutes have been approved. All right, the next item on the agenda is a public comment. We have instituted a new procedure for this meeting. I'm very pleased that we're going to open these meetings up for public comment. We have a sign-in process before the meeting, and we do have one member of the public who signed up to speak, Mr. Robert Ceccarelli. I'd ask Mr. Ceccarelli to step to the mic. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. Robert Ceccarelli, can you hear me?
Yes.
As always, none of the city council members are here, and I do the eye test. If I'm interested in something, I would come. I've been doing this for 15 meetings. Only 2 city council members have come to any of these meetings. I suggest whoever elected you to come here, they come. Because you're wasting your time, big time. Because it's going through the same thing as last year. I've been to all those homeless commission meetings. Walensky gave a big fat F, Dallas Morning News. 39 out of 40 people of last year's commission, they didn't like it. None. Okay? So I would suggest if they're interested, they come, or you're wasting your time. Big time. I'll tell you right now, I'm the one with experience about this, all right? Now, I have 2 articles, one by me, CBS News, and by James Dunn. I really emphasize rapid rehousing because the mayor is stuck on it, MDHA is stuck on permanent supportive housing. As you look at the cottages, it took 8 years to build. We don't have time for it. We don't have time for it. Listen up, please. And I'm asking for a homeless forum to have homeless people speak out. That will really jug and really feel what's going on. I'm asking for the chairman to set up a homeless forum with help with Charletra and Cindy Crane and use the flag room, okay? And we need to get out what the real problems are. You do not experience homelessness. You do not know what the real problems are, what it's like. It's got to come out now. I'm tired of it, really. I'm serious about this, man, really. And James Dunn, remember he had all those vouchers of people here last year, 400 people that need housing? Well, he did it because he's so frustrated about the shelters. He talks about Dignity Homeless Action Network, a community of homeless and concerned citizens who are fighting for action to be taken on such as issues as housing, abuse in the local shelters, and other concerns. The shelters, Callahan, city council member, he talks about the beds that are available at the Dallas Life Foundation. However, he forgot to tell us it costs $12 a night. He wants to tell us what he wants us to hear. He doesn't tell the whole story. And I'm getting fed up with it. And when I spoke up Tuesday, Mayor Rollins was texting all those 3 minutes when I was on the talking about the cottages. Now, how much time have I left?
Yeah, 1 more minute.
Okay. Now, about the cottages, there have been deaths over there, mass exodus of people, and I'm really suggesting if I stayed there, I would bust my heart out to crack cocaine. All right? Larry James does not let anybody in there as far as visitors, and the bags are not checked. that is the wrong place for the chronically homeless to stay at. It's a dangerous area. You got the cottages all over the place, and it needs to be closed or re-advised what's going on, because it's not going to work with the cottages being infested with drugs and prostitution over there. Big time. You need to check into it. I don't know about housing first, but they cannot accept the drugs and prostitution there, and I really want this homeless forum to start. It will make a big dent in the homelessness, and that make sure that you hear what the homeless have to say and feel. If not, you're wasting your time altogether. One more thing before. So permanent supportive housing will take years. The rapid rehousing, I understand, you can includes in your being homeless, okay? So all that money, the $20 million, please, me and James Dunn don't agree with permanent supportive housing. The homeless will tell you that. You need to have that happen. Please do that, or you're wasting your time. You might as well just go home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ceccarelli. All right, the next item on the agenda is introductions. Michelle Hall is a new member of the commission. She's not here at the moment, but we welcome her to the commission. So let's move to item 6, report by Cindy Crane, the president and CEO of MDHA, Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance, which is the organization that, as she will tell us in more detail, administers the HUD funding as well as the Homeless Management Information System, is intended to be the central coordinating agency in the city for homeless services and programs. So welcome, Cindy.
Thank you, Mr. Webb, and thank you, Commissioners. I appreciate your volunteer time focusing on the issue of homelessness. So I've got a really long PowerPoint, but
Oh, it looked green. I've got those blue removing glasses, and so I couldn't see. I apologize. Anyway, Cindy Crane with Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance, and I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to tell you about my organization and the continuum of care. I'll kind of speed through some of these PowerPoint slides. Primarily, we look at why are we here? Specifically, statutorily, the Hearth Act was passed in May of 2009, establishing and reaffirming that a continuum of care is a local body that does planning and makes itself the primary agency, an organization to address the issues of homelessness in the community. The Hearth Act codifies that a local community should have a COC planning agency that represents the community. Specifically, 2 years after the Hearth Act, the federal government issued the Code of Federal Regulations that addressing the interim rule, and specifically it lists a lot of different things that we're supposed to do, but primarily 3 things: operate the continuum of care, designate an HMIS, and plan for the continuum of care, so what we call COC planning and COC operations. And I put number 4 in asterisk, though it is not listed in the first, that one section of 24 CFR. Coordinated assessment, coordinated access, coordinated entry systems are referenced in multiple places within the Code of Federal Regulation. So that's the federal regulation. So locally, we have a continuum of care board of directors. When I started in March of 2015, we began to review the bylaws. They went through about a 6.5-month review process and then an approval process. And in March of 2016, we approved our updated bylaws. Essentially, this organization provides the oversight, planning, review, and directs some of the COC planning, and specifically, as you can see from the organization chart of the COC, the board of directors, beneath them there's actually an assembly membership. This is a continuum care membership that makes up the direct service providers. They meet monthly. They really do the groundwork, and it's the entity that we're able to really address some of the homeless response system. MDHA staff, my organization staffs, the assembly and the board of directors. The COC board has 4 primary standing committees: policies and procedures. With HUD comes continual need for policies and procedures and updates that we have to implement. They do the final review and the voting of that based on a lot of input. The HMIS committee, it is also required to have a governance structure to be able to provide oversight and advisory capacity over the homeless management information system. The Performance Review and Allocations Committee, one of the things that we do is distribute the $16 million, and we actually have an appointed committee that reviews annually and decides what projects will be funded with that $16 million. And then the Executive Committee is essentially a subset of the board, and they perform a lot of the functions of a 501c3, reviewing the audit, monthly financials, and actually conduct the review of the CEO, that being me. And then they report this to the overall board. Today, by the way, it was the meeting of our board this morning, and so there was a lot of report out. The Assembly represents a lot of the work. When you think of the barriers, the siloed systems, the COC Assembly provides that. There's a chair and a vice chair of that. They're direct service providers. They also have a dedicated place on the Executive Committee of the board. And again, we have staff members that work with them. They have a Policies and Procedures Committee. Whenever we think we need a new business rule, a new policy and procedure on how we interact or how we implement assistance, it goes through a review process first by the frontline workers, and then they advise and make recommendation to the board, and the Assembly has a vote. The Alliance Homeless Forum is the consumer-led group that's been meeting for several years at the library, meeting once a month. They give us more input from those with lived experience or experiencing homelessness. And then there is an array of committees that Gloria got. And this is where the Continuing Care Strategic Work Plan, this is a big chunk of the work. People who are trying to figure out how to best serve, how to address barriers. We don't wait to an annual review. It's a continuous improvement process of addressing different issues. And then on the colored chart, that is my actual 501c3 organization for Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance. I try to just kind of color code it. The blue is the Homeless Management Information Staffing and Contracts. The yellow is the Coordinated Assessment System. The green is that COC planning, the larger view of how the entire homeless response system, from supportive services, street outreach, emergency shelter, transitional housing, safe haven, permanent supportive housing, other permanent housing, how they all interrelate with the community. Those are what we are really charged to looking at and integrating with coordinated assessment and HMIS, and then 2 staff members related to administration. This is a generic budget that we have. Right in 2008, we projected about a $1.7 million budget. You can see the first 3 line items, that's COC planning, coordinated assessment, and HUD HMIS. Of the $16 million, those funds come directly from that, fulfilling all the federal mandates and requirements and guidelines, interim rule, HMIS, and reporting, and that supports that. And then the balance is just other resources. And traditionally, the City of Dallas, we have received $150,000 a year to support the collaborative application and the planning efforts. So quickly, the COC planning, a lot of what we're known most for, you think of that collaborative application, but that really only represents about 10% of our work. The collaborative application we submit to HUD wants to know about everything we did in the year, how we're going to address youth, how we're going to address domestic violence, what have we done, what have we accomplished, how are you on veterans, chronic homeless. We have to encapsulate all the work that we did in the year, because that application goes from our local competition to competing with the over 400 continuum of care nationally for those funds. We count the homeless, we manage the inventory of services are provided, and there's an array of reports where we evaluate, assess what is going on within the homeless response system. Additionally, other than those federal requirements, we produce an annual continuum of care strategic work plan. We did our first progress report this morning to the board. We put it out on our social media. It's out there. And we also produce our community dashboard, which is a snapshot of different things. And so we train, we advocate. We probably have at least 140 meetings per year where we do the work of the homeless response system. In all of this work, with that primary goal that is also in the preamble of the Hearth Act, is to house people as rapidly as possible. The coordinated assessment system, this is, it evolves as HUD continues to provide guidelines and the experience around the United States at what works best. So I have the interim rule, I have community planning and development notices by HUD, policies and procedures. Again, basically coordinated assessment is, Who needs our housing and services who are homeless, and what resources do we have to distribute, and what is the most efficient, best way to distribute those resources, basically based on a progressive engagement. Those who need the lightest touch, give them the lightest resource. Those who need more intense interventions, provide that. Those that need exceptional supports, long-term, such as permanent supportive housing, we make sure that we distribute those resources and target them based on need, again, to make sure people are housed as quickly as possible. And so there's a lot of coordinated assessment is integrated within the homeless management information system. It involves a lot of other things, flexible assistance funds, landlord engagement. There's a lot of tools that we use. The org chart kind of gives more of a visual pathway where people may interact with the homeless response system by phone. They may walk up to your shelter. They may be street outreach. They may find you on the computer. They may call 211. And so we take those intake points and we make sure that our system of care does things consistently, that we use common measurement tools, that we first conduct the triage to decide what level of care they need. We use common assessments. Now we prioritize people based on their vulnerability using common measures and instruments. People who need housing from rapid rehousing, transitional housing, safe haven go on a centralized housing priority list that we produce weekly. And then you can see the bottom is supposed to represent the different distribution. Very expensive permanent supportive housing that can be anywhere from $6,000 to $20,000 a year per person. You want to make sure it goes to the people who need that kind of care the most. And we want to make sure that we distribute things based on need. The next slide is just another way to kind of look at coordinated assessment from a very simple supply and demand. People come into the system, and I put the H in quote. They may believe they're homeless, but we have to dig a little deeper and find out. Some people say, well, I'm homeless, so what they mean is I don't have a rent, I'm staying with my mom, I want to move out, I want to have that independence. Well, moving into the homeless response system would not be a very efficient way to address those needs. Then we have at risk of homelessness. There is actually a federal definition, a HUD definition for at risk of homelessness. Now, if you're at risk of homelessness, we want to do prevention or diversion, anything we can to keep you from ending up on the street or in an emergency shelter. And then there's homeless with a capital H. You meet the federal definition. And so that is how we try to very, very simply put, organize the demand for certain services within the homeless response system. And then when we look at the supply of what we have, the scarce resources, we've adopted a policy of no empty bed. How many beds are available? We measure that. What's the occupancy? If there's an empty bed, how long does it take to turn over? We want to make sure that every bed possible that falls within that system of care that we use. This is an example, the next slide, of the housing priority list. It's a very generic version of them. Go back to the next slide. There you go. So this is a very simplified version. Every Monday morning, we produce a housing priority list. People move on the list and people come off the list as they are housed or they're made inactive. And we put as much information as possible. So our different housing programs, let's say Traswell's here with Hillcrest House. He knows someone's going to move out in December. We already have people verified, documented in the homeless management information system, paper ready to move in. He's going to go to this list and look down and he's going to inquire to see those. We don't put HIV, AIDS, positive, negative on this slide, but we have a way so that he knows that when that bed's we can find someone queued up, ready to move in, so that the time that unit is empty is as short as possible. And we do that with our other permanent supportive housing programs. Many of our programs are going to have business rules where they have to take off the top of the list. This is something called the HPL tracker, and this is one of the reports that I look at frequently. Next slide, please. This is, we've had an updated one. Essentially, this is a way to look at the housing priority list over time. The top line are people who are chronic homeless, meet the federal definition of chronic homelessness. And so it's at 197. On November 2nd, it's down to 178. I'm able to see how we are moving and evolution over time. And what we're finding is we're starting to get finally the down curve, because we have the business rules where chronic homelessness is starting to go down. The other value of this is that we used to estimate chronic homelessness based on the point-in-time count self-report. Over time, 6 months from now, when someone says how many chronically homeless people have, I'm going to be able to probably know that 95% of those people experiencing chronic homelessness who have not been housed yet, I know who they are, where they are, what their disability is, do they have income, and be able to work that list. The green are people with disabilities, but for time homeless, they could become chronic. And so some of our other interventions, we want to get them before they become chronic. And then the lower ones are lower acuity. The head of household does not have a disability. That's where we're finding families. And as more and more individuals or agencies within our continuum of care are using HMIS, completing the DOPS process, the documentation of priority status, where we verify, we're seeing those upticks. And so right now, when I look at the one, we had like 697 individuals who are currently on the housing priority list. The next slide just talks about some other resources we brought to the table. Remember from the commission report, we said we had all these people couldn't find landlords. I have someone who with a real estate background who now goes out and hustles landlords and talks to them and said, why don't you participate in our program? And so we've been able to begin to accrue landlords who are willing, within fair market rent, willing to take people with a lot of high barriers and that inventory. And I keep my inventory, I'm selfish, private, so that my permanent supportive housing programs and my rapid housing programs have access to that list, because they've committed to helping solve the problem of homelessness. And then James is one managing that supply, no empty bed. Now we're going to talk about the Homeless Management Information System. It is essentially, it's a client database. I have 38 individual agencies who are within the response system who use the system. They have their own instance of the software, and then the software data and information is aggregated. The McKinney-Vento Hearth Act, as well as the Continuum Care Interim Rule, are your primary governance of the HMIS system. That we have to have a single system, that the continuum care has to decide who's going to manage it, and that they have to review the different rules, data quality, the plan, ensure participation, and the data quality in order to be able to tell the story of homelessness accurately and provide performance reporting of our different programs. The 2004 data standards and security and privacy has not changed, but since that time, HUD has modified the HUD guidelines again, and often, and as of, again, October 1. It's always a challenge to make sure that we update systems. It's a challenge to HMIS vendors to make sure, and each of the individual federal programs, this is more than HUD, it's HOPWA, it's VA, it's HHS SAMHSA. They all have their own sets of manuals and program manuals that have to be in the system. So the HMIS informs us of who becomes homeless, who's vulnerable, what assets that they are using, how long they have been in the homeless response system, and also to be able to say who returns into the homeless response system. It also lets us look at the homeless response system from the view of the programs, being able to look at different programs and see who's performing well, who is not performing well, what agencies maybe need to modify their programs as a way to provide information on who should be refunded, what's working, what's not, how should we distribute our resources. Other things that we want to know is, I'm going to go to 32. The primary ways that the HMIS system is used is through intake assessments, intake of the client, update assessments, annual assessments when something significant change, exit assessments when you leave. This is all part of system performance. When you left a program, did you exit back into homeless? Did you exit into a transitional situation? Did you exit to permanent housing? Because these are all critical signs of performance in a healthy response system. The VI SPDAT, the Vulnerability Index, is also integrated in the system. The CAS prioritization system process is also integrated into the HMIS system. Data quality, we provide substantial training, information, we run data quality reports, we have a pretty substantial data quality plan. So there have been a lot of questions about how we transitioned from our Caseworthy HMIS software. In March 2015, when I started, we were using Caseworthy, completely compliant, usable system. In April 2015, the Parkland Center for Social Innovation was ready, had finished their development of their initial IRIS product, and came to us because they wanted us to participate in the information exchange portal, a larger community-wide, something that touched more than just an HMIS system and truly a human resource and a medical resource of information for the community. So through that time, through October 2015, we talked about what an HMIS system is. They wanted the cohort of homelessness, the impact of homelessness on institutions, medical care, and community-based organizations in Dallas. This goes way outside just shelters and housing services. So we did multiple forums, presentations, demonstrations. In November 2015, the Continuum Care Board of Directors, as they are instructed to do through the CFR, adopted the IRIS system and designated it as our next HMIS system. And so from there, and part of the reason this is a good, the diagram, previous slide, the diagram of IRIS. And I do want to recognize that with us today, back, way back, 35, thank you very much. Oh, I wish I was there. Anyway, you've got it in front of you. The IRIS, in other words, it's not just homelessness. It touches education agencies, housing utilities, food security, family support, in a way that HMIS is just one ecosystem of the story of people who are vulnerable in the Dallas population. And so between November 2016 and April 2017, in order for this to become our HMIS system, we continued to use Caseworthy, and they had to meet. In order for them to be the IEP, to serve as a HMIS, they had to meet all the federal regulations, SAMHSA grants, HHS grants, HOPA grants, HUD grants. And so we went live in April of this year, and so we're about 6 months in. And that gives you the different stages that we worked in. And now we're at November of 2017, and we're working on a variety of reporting problems, anomalies in data, and the CSV reports have been done for CAPER. There's a lot of jargon. One of the most exciting things that I asked, we're 6 months in, our first shot of the IEP side, the Plexus side, the community side, which was the whole reason that we knew that we wanted to be a part of the IEP. What was really interesting, when you look at the total set of Pieces IRIS, there's about 40 organizations that are homeless response system, but there's another 60 that are not, but they're in the space of human services. And when the first thing that Dr. Shaw sent me, he is on the PCCI side, began to show me some of the data this morning, it was pretty profound, that of the whole data set, 7% of the people in IRIS, the big IRIS, the whole IEP, 7% access 2 or more services. When you just look at MDHA's set ecosystem, 21% of those individuals used 2 or more services, is what we knew. The cost to the community and the resources necessary that develop because people are experiencing homelessness and do not homes is profound. And then I just got it, and I do want to recognize Dr. Ruben Emersingham is here, VJ, who's a senior developer, and Jared, they're in the back. They represent PTI, Pieces Technology, Inc., their COO, who have been an extraordinary partner in this project. And one of the most interesting things that they ran for me is say, okay, now what about Parkland? We hear a lot about Parkland. It said, after adjusted by age, gender, race, financial class, and an ACRR model, we observed a significant association with being homeless and readmission. The patients who are marked as homeless are 1.67 times more likely to have readmission. So the implication of homelessness, the reason we needed HMIS to be a part of the IEP was because of broader community Dallas issues, and that's why we made the decision to designate. We knew we were first out of the gate. There are not any other communities who are doing it in such a dramatic community-wide integrated way. We knew that there would be value, and every month that goes by is going to feed the information for us to be able to provide more improved services. HMIS utilization, Salvation Army went live on October 1. Dallas Life continues to add more clients. I don't know exactly where we are percentage-wise. Our AHAR report is being run right now, and it is due December 1. Our goal is 86% because that is a critical threshold related to collaborative applicant funding, and so we will take that measure from October 1, 2017 to September 30 in that year's annual report. Our next step in the HMIS system is we're going to begin the integration of jail frequent utilizers into the prioritization process. TransitCare provides that contracted services with the jail, so when they have bookends, they're going to do a short form to mark bookends, and what will happen is when they hit a certain threshold, they're going to inform our housing priority list, our coordinated assessment, that they are a frequent utilizer, and I will be able to verify that they're also a homeless individual, so that on that housing priority list, it's not going to be just about HUD priority priorities. We're going to have our local community jail priorities. And then eventually we'll get our local emergency department. The other value of that is if I'm a permanent supportive housing project and I have a case management meeting with Sally, Sally doesn't show up, I go into HMIS because I'm going to note that she missed her meeting, and I may look in the encounters and see jail book in. Now I know where Sally is. I can immediately call and try to negotiate that discharge so that they don't lose their housing. And so these are some of the different ways. December, the scan card system, we're going to start with Austin Street to implement so that for those shelters, day shelters, that those check-ins can be swifter. January, we're going to be expanding ways that we use the HMIS for the point-in-time count. In February, March, in preparation for the State of the Homeless Address, we're going to have more substantial, not just the HMIS side, but the IEP side, the IRIS side of what's going on with homeless individuals, because we have that advantage. And MDHA next steps, we have substantially put into place a homeless response system, supply, demand, reporting. Now our next step is now we're rolling up our sleeves and we're going to start doing a series of housing challenges. We're going to start with the top 25 list. On the housing priority list, we have some people that have been on there for almost a year, even despite updates. We're going to start staffing and go, why are they still here? Why are they not housed? We're going to be adding business rules that tell our permanent supportive housing you must take from the top of the list. That happens in January. February and March, we're going to start our veteran housing challenge. We have a significant, the lowest number of veterans ever that we reported in our dashboard, down to 244. That's not functional zero, but we're going to be doing a surge housing in February and March. April through June, we've already started the planning. Dr. David Woody of the Bridge is the chair of that committee in introducing an emergency shelter housing challenge after a very successful project that was done in Georgia. And so then we're going to learn what we did, what doesn't work in the homeless response system, what did, what's the data, rinse, repeat, and start all over again, running constantly, doing top 25 staffing and making sure that if we get functional zero for veterans, is that we maintain that going forward and just continue to learn from what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crane. You've covered a lot of ground. I do have a few questions, and I hope other members of the commission will have some as well. The focus, and rightly so, of the programs and services of MDHA and your slide presentation is on housing. Part of your mandate under the Hearth Act is also to promote self-sufficiency of the homeless, and that, to me, that would seem to include employment and job readiness, economic opportunity. So is that, I'm assuming that's not beyond the scope of what MDHA does, and you want to comment on what you're doing in that area?
Absolutely. Like last year, my continued care strategic work plan from last year, we had a whole thing of the increased income, right? And so we focused on access to mainstream benefits. You saw the number of people with disabilities, and that's one of the, we also are measured on that. If you have a disability or aging, we try to secure that income, that guaranteed SSI, SSDI, or aged benefits income. As to employment, without question, when we finished last year and I did that final report, we were absolutely negligent. It is absolutely the biggest hole that we have is figuring out how to address the employment challenges. So you lose your IDs, and so we've been focusing on those that we've got to get housed because of their cost. It's literally just a line item that says no action yet, other than we've done training. We had, during our roundtable training, we had some of the employment programs come out and let our case managers know how they access this, where all the different programs are. The one that was, of course, the best was the one for veterans, because everything's free and they do everything. And so our veterans have a great resource. And I was like, why? I wish I had that for all people experiencing homelessness. So it is absolutely, without question, something we've got to become more integrated with the workforce board and figure that out. But I know that the Bridge there's a lot of people who do employment, the Bridge and Austin Street, but we have to do more, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Now, on a couple of slides, I think 12 and 22, there's reference to your housing inventory chart. Is that a comprehensive chart of what's available in the community? Is it internally sourced only? Or what?
The housing inventory chart specifically is for housing that is dedicated for people experiencing homelessness. So it's going to have permanent supportive housing funded by the COC, private funded permanent supportive housing, homeless preference, project-based programs funded by the Dallas Housing Authority, transitional housing. It is housing that is for people to get access to those. You need to be someone who is experiencing homelessness, and in some housing at risk of homelessness. So it is essentially the pipeline. So you have your list of housing opportunities, and that is published on our website, and I could absolutely provide that to you all. And it's something that we have to maintain. We submit a formal housing inventory chart when we do our audit in January. It's usually due by the end of March to HUD. Now, HUD uses that as our baseline and measures our occupancy rates, how well we're using the housing, and just to make sure so they can see how many beds that there are going into the homeless response system when they roll it all up to report to Congress. But it's also our tool that we use, because we were having 80 and 84% occupancies. Now our permanent supportive housing is just over 90%. So there's always a few beds available, and so part of our job is to get that occupancy rate at 100% at all times by making sure we are on our agencies and say, how can we help you fill that bed as soon as possible?
Okay. And how is that list, is it populated by participants in HMIS? Are they required to participate, or is it just anyone you...
Absolutely not. It's not. So you may have, like, Samaritan Inn in McKinney, they have their transitional program for families. They're not in the HMIS, but absolutely, it's available. So that way, the housing inventory chart also helps you feed referrals and mechanisms. Anything that is funded through the Emergency Solutions Grant or Continuum Care, or wanting to do that, they fill their beds from the housing priority list. Samaritan wouldn't. We are not currently assigning emergency shelter beds. We're not there yet, and not a lot of communities are. It's assigning those subsidized assets that are prioritized and assigned.
Okay, thanks. On slide 13, there's a reference to your evaluating continuum of care and ESG projects. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Is that include an audit? Can you elaborate on that? Does that include an audit, or what is involved in that?
Continuum care program grants, or almost anyone's in the HMIS, they're all required to use HMIS. We run quarterly data quality reports, and it also provides information in relationship to leavers and stayers and occupancy and data quality. And then we actually do a site visit once a year, and we literally mock what HUD would do if they monitored your program. So we have all the materials. We know what HUD would ask. We tend not to get into your finances like HUD would, but we look at all your programmatic information, your intake forms, your exit forms. We randomly pick 4 or 5 different client files and making sure that there's evidence that you did case management. So we essentially do our own due diligence. And then at the end of a program year, we do a scorecard. And we score everybody based on a July 1 to June. This is for continuum care only. ESG is a different year. And we actually do a scorecard. How many people did you house? How much money did you get back to HUD? How many people did you get mainstream benefits? So really all the things that relate to self-sufficiency, housing stability, participation in COC, we do scorecards, and that becomes kind of the baseline score to whether or not we're going to refund you for COC. And then we provide the similar type of information through HMIS reporting for our ESG grantees, emergency solution grantees.
Okay. And then on slide 38, your reference to 86% HMIS participation rate. So what universe of providers does that cover? 86%?
86% refers to all of the housing inventory chart for housing. Emergency shelter and transitional housing, safe haven, and permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. That if I have an inventory of 1,000 beds, I want to say that I have 860. Report regularly whether who is in that bed or whether it's empty over a course of a year. So that's it's not just I can't just do it one time. I have to say that bed, I report whether that's bed empty, who's in it, who's out, who exited, who stayed and leave all the way through the year, so that you can get an annualized performance measurement.
Okay. The HMIS system, I know the process of implementing it has been long, and there have been some issues, I think, with providers and interfacing with their existing programs, et cetera. So it sounds like, based on your meeting this morning, that there's a lot of progress has been made there, and that folks are on board with that. Are there still glitches to be worked out? Is it a flexible system that you can modify to accommodate concerns? Or what?
Yes, yes, it's working. It's improving every day. And, the system, like if I could have the Plexus view, that would be awesome. One of the decisions that we made that has been a challenge on reporting is that under the former HMI system, and most HMI systems, there's one license, so there's one instance. And then you have all these different agencies access the system. When we were having the dialogue, if we were going to do IRIS, there was a key decision with the COC board and our providers. The emergency shelters very emphatically wanted a separate instance. So you have 40 different or 38 different instances of IRIS. And so then they key in data, then it goes into that I'll call it a data warehouse for lack of a technical term. And so then when you want to report on the aggregate, when this is all active, there have been challenges when we have run annual performance reports, especially in aggregate, because I'm pulling data from it's a very complex system. And if you only if you're pulling different things from different forms from different clients all the time, it's been complex. And there have been some difficulties with annual performance reports, some data anomalies, refresh and timeout data. And we work with the IRIS team, PTI, daily. We have stand-up meetings weekly where we go there or they go to our house and we go through the issues, we go through the service desk and we work through those issues. So every day it is an improvement. And as to customization, I call it system enhancements. So the basics is, I showed you, without going through all the data manuals and the rules that relate to the data standards for homeless management information system. To successfully, and this is not my first transition, first you say, let's not customize until everything is working well. Okay, now that things are smooth, so that way your training has a long shelf life because everybody uses the system in the same methodology, in the same way, the same steps. The workflow is similar. And then when you have different needs, emergency shelters have very different needs than a permanent supportive housing program. They've got people in and out, hundreds of people, different types of services. So there has to be some accommodation for that, and we've been working through those issues. But we're going to work our way slowly into service enhancements that are unique to a particular agency. We run it through a very basic gamut. Okay, first, I hear your request. I can see it could be, it may add a convenience. Does it adhere to security and privacy standards of HUD? Because it doesn't matter if that is, we can't do that. And then we make sure, does it meet all federal reporting requirements? And meaning that if you made modifications, I still have to run an AHAR over the entire data system. So if you change, I have to make sure that that change would not impact any of the federal reporting. And then there's data quality reporting. You have to make sure that it would not be a barrier. And then if it meets those three tests, now we get into, okay, is it feasible with the software? How much is it going to cost? If it's something that will benefit all my shelters, I would say, why don't we implement this and let's use my funds to pay for it. We're just now moving into that realm. We've got some things that Salvation Army submitted. We've got some things from Eric Peterson at the bridge. And so we have to first run it through, or Austin Street rather. We've got to run it through. First, will it mess anything up? Because you don't want to do is going to mess anything up. Because we want to have as commonality of a system as possible so that when we slice data, it'll work. And then we'll look at the feasibility, and if it's something that really is not germane to the homeless response system, we'll absolutely facilitate. You have a conversation with IRIS, because remember, you have your own instance of IRIS, and let them work with you from a technical perspective, maybe outside the homeless response system to make that happen. So that was the flexibility we wanted with different license, separate instances, is that there would be some autonomy of the individual agencies. But we want to make sure that all this works first to the federal standard, because that's the biggest chunk of money, all those federal dollars that roll in. We want to make sure that we meet that standard first before we start changing things.
Okay, other questions? Mr. Cruz?
Just to follow up on that subject, as we talk about integration and customization with the HMI system with IRIS, after hearing last month from the bridge and some of the frustrations it seems that they had with that, I reached out to them. I come from a technical background myself in insurance enrollment software, and I was hoping to work with them and maybe report back to the commission on some of the more, this is all very vague, to actually see the working of the system, what features are available, what the features they seem are missing, and I was wondering if you would maybe provide me the same opportunity to come in and see it working firsthand and delve in a little deeper than perhaps is possible in this setting.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, sure.
And
And we did. We met the PTI staff, the developing staff that they're in the back, and Alfie, I forgot to mention Alfie, she's back there. I asked the bridge, Dr. Woody, I want to see everything. Show me the mistakes, screenshot, whatever. And they did a very thorough presentation. PTI heard it. We started prioritizing the different fixes and the schedule of fixes, and that is ongoing. Absolutely. There were some.
Could you provide that information you shared with you, those screenshots to us as well, so we can get a better,
I don't have them. I don't have them. I mean, they're in the process of it. We'll address your curiosity and absolutely
Okay.
get you together with the Ira staff and my team, my lead HMIS directors here. Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, we can talk specifics offline. Yeah, good. Thank you, Cindy. Others? Ms. Conrad?
I'd like to ask, have you guys thought about incorporating a little pilot program for the transitional homeless, like you pay maybe $200 or $300 to help them get into a place up to 3 months? That would give them enough time to generate enough revenue to sustain it on their own. It would be a pilot program to do so, to help them move right along.
Absolutely, and your idea is so good that it's one of the models that sounds like what you're suggesting is rapid rehousing, and we now have 700, as of the end of September, 727 people in rapid rehousing, and it's that, you're homeless, we're going to move you in, you're the leaseholder, you the tenant, the lease is in their name, I'm going to give you case management as much as you need, we're going to agree, we have a COC policy of a rate of amount of money that we'll pay for your rent.
Right.
Maybe you pay no more than 30%, maybe I pay 100% of your rent for 3 months, try to scale back as you achieve some stability.
That's right.
And that exists, it's called rapid rehousing. And it's funded through both the Continuum Care and Emergency Solutions Grant. And that's exactly how it operates. And so one of the things that you may or may not have a copy of is we've been looking at the rate of success of exits. So some people it looks like the average was about 6 months. What we noted at the end of September, that the average length of stay in our programs has gone from 129 days to 218 days, which means they're not able to roll off that program because rents are going up and they're going, but they're still on the program. So our goal is to try to wean you off of that subsidy, but still retain case management for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and some of the programs could go up to 18 months. But so that exists, and that is considered a best practice. And I know that the city of Dallas, in their special allocation, the 1.9 million, is rapid rehousing going to be in that? Which is, oh, okay, never mind.
Have you incorporated an exit plan for them? I mean, something that...
Absolutely. That's a part, of course, the rapid rehousing means you transition in place. I'm not going to make you go find another unit. This is a home. We decided this is where you're going to be. How do we wean you off there? Oh, from budgeting, increased employment, make sure, should we update your SNAPs? Maybe there's some more money there that you need. Is there, there's some legal issues, especially related to families with children, who's like, you know what, I know you don't want to, but let's get legal aid in here and let's get let's get that child support going again so that you can achieve. So that is all a part of tenant-based case management.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is that we need more landlords to participate in this solution.
And we're right now we're doing pretty good with the landlords. The complexity is that we have a lot of people, remember that tracker, who are elderly. The mean age of that list on those top 2 lines is about 58 years old with a $737 check and maybe $198 in SNAPs, and that's it, and those incomes are never going to go up.
Right.
So now where am I going to find affordable housing? It will take a subsidy of rent for that person to move out of the homeless. And so that's why they're waiting. They're waiting, and we're trying to make sure that our pipeline moves as fast as possible so that their wait is shorter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Thank you for your presentation. On your street outreach task force, are the agencies also participating in HMIS since they are boots on the ground?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yes,
Okay.
and increasingly so. A lot of that documentation prior to status, those people on the HPL, a lot of them come from street outreach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I get a list of who your street outreach teams are on the task force and their HMIS participation?
Okay, yeah, everyone participates.
Well,
City Square, yeah, I can get you a list.
Our
yeah.
calling is on HMIS?
Our calling's not, but we work with Wayne. I mean, one of the value of our calling, because he has an excellent database, when you're doing documentation of homelessness, it's critical for eligibility. You have to prove you've been homeless over a course of time. And Wayne has been there since the beginning. When we know that they're going to their facility and they're not in there, he absolutely he literally pulls a service history that they collect and does a letter for us to prove documentation of homelessness. He's been extremely cooperative in helping with that process.
But he's on the task force, the street outreach task force, but he's not on HMIS? Okay.
No, he's not
So
on HMIS.
So it's not a requirement for the street outreach task force teams to be on HMIS?
Unless if they're funded by the Emergency Solutions Grant, they are. And then, so City Square is there, City of Dallas is online, the youth outreach is online. Most of them, you're not required, those task force and committees are about solving problems and dropping barriers. So there's no, so they communicate, they staff what's going on, do we need to target a place, do we need to do a blitz? Everybody is there, Prism Health is there. I mean, there's a lot of people who are part of that just to address the unsheltered. We encourage them, if they're not there, I mean, we did a blitz at our calling. Our team went there to start this process of documentation of homelessness because it's the only way they're going to access housing is through this process. And so we have been welcome and conducted a street outreach blitz at our calling. It was like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, that seems like an extra step, though. And if all the outreach teams are on HMIS, it seems like that extra step of having to go and redress it and follow up could be eliminated.
Yeah, but you know what, if Wayne wanted to look at this, I mean, he's absolutely happy to, but he's got a great system, and right now it's cooperative and non-adversarial, and I think as an independent, private, faith-based community, they're more comfortable using a separate system, and I'm just going to respect that. I mean, but still, there's at least a cooperative relationship. So I think one step at a time. Maybe they might think when Iris is up and running, and maybe they will when they see some of the other benefits from the IEP perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Middleton, you have a question?
Okay, so I saw your 86%, but that's not 86% of the beds are being captured on HMIS, correct?
That's my goal, 86%. That
your
we
goal.
will achieve it by the end of September next year, over a course of a year.
And so where are we at today?
I told you the AHAR is being printed right now. It's probably, without Union Gospel Mission's other beds on there, Salvation Army came online, that was a big leap. I suppose I'm somewhere in the 60% right now. And Dallas Life has gone beyond their veterans program, and they've got two of their 5 programs are in there, and I think they're going to increase doing that because there are people now getting on the housing priority list. They're able to access the system. So there's Samaritan. One of the things that we changed in addressing Collin County, which is part of our jurisdiction, is that we decided to just embed an MDHA employee 3 days out of the week there, and it has been tremendously helpful in helping them consider and examine our system and integrating in that. And so we've started adopting a few people from Samaritan in and helping them to see the benefit of what happens when they're a part of one single system. So just being patient and slowly working our way towards that goal.
So about 2 years ago, Dallas COC was rated in the lowest 20% across the country. Where do you think we're at now?
I don't know. They'll pull that report. First, they're waiting for the AHAR reports to come out. That's done nationally. They probably won't print out a report. I bet they don't do till probably March, because once we do our annual homeless assessment report, all goes up to DC, crunch, crunch, crunch. They review it, approve it, and then they say thumbs up, thumbs down, and then those reports are made public to certain agencies, and so we won't find out probably not till March. So, I mean, I'm looking at it. I can like thumbnail it, but I haven't done it in preparation for this meeting today.
So at the time of the previous rating, participation in HMS was low, and that was a year ago.
It was
right?
low, yes, absolutely. It was pretty abysmal. But that report came out measuring the prior year before, right? So it would have essentially been 2 years old data.
Okay. Mr. Castillo, did you have your hand up?
So it sounds like there's resistance from the nonprofit sector to participate in HMIS. Would you agree with that or no?
Like right now, there's some,
No,
some
just,
yes.
I mean,
Some
as
yes.
far as the participants in the HMIS system, it sounds like we're only paying attention to those who are being, in other words, receiving funding from us, right, the city. So what about the nonprofit sector? And which organizations would you say the percentage is nonprofits with those who are?
Almost all of them use it for something. Now, our calling is a day shelter. Stewpot does not use it, a day shelter. And Samaritan Inn, transitional housing in McKinney does not use it. The domestic violence programs use a separate system that's under the VAWA Act, and everyone uses a little. Union Gospel Mission puts all their veteran beds in there. Dallas Life is coming on. So the number of people, the resistance is shrinking quickly. I mean, those are the ones I can say within that cohort of who's on the housing inventory chart, who is, their direct mission is to tend to the homeless. There's very few that are not in some capacity in the HMIS system.
Okay.
Remember, it's participation over a course of a year. I can't put that 86% measure until I have 1 year's worth of use, like Salvation Army just came online, right? Dallas Life, about 4 months. I have to, that ruler doesn't apply until I have 12 months of consistent participation.
Okay.
I have a quick question. Thank you for your presentation. I was looking at the list of sort of the, so when we're talking about who's participating, are the organizations that are focusing on families and youth, are they participating?
Yes, Promise House, City House,
Okay.
City Square Track, yes.
Family Gateway, all?
Oh yeah, Family Gateway, absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
All of them, 100%.
Thank you.
Mr. McMahon?
Thank you. I have two quantitative questions, probably a short answer and then one more qualitative. On slide 20, in the discussion of coordinated assessment, in the column labeled submitting agency, I'm curious about how many agencies submitted a referral, housing referral.
Every street outreach and I don't know, I have to pull that number for you. I mean, it's going to be the Bridge, Austin Street, Family Gateway, it's going to be Youth, Track, City Square, Street Outreach, City of Dallas, yeah.
Okay, so it's multiple agencies that are referring.
Absolutely, yeah, they go through the process, that's right.
Are there any housing placements that derive from MDHA? MDHA is responsible for putting somebody on the list who's not a referral.
So,
Let's say somebody internal at MDHA in your staff that's not a referral from one of the other agencies that are submitted.
that instance has occurred with the Collin County individual, because part of the reason we want to show them how HMIS works, and because Samaritan Inn is not an HMIS user, we've used my staff, DRC Dresser, when she's at the Assistance Center of Collin County, has been helping them, like, sit down, let me show you how this works. So yeah, do I have an account? I do, because I also manage the Flexible Assistance Fund, and we keep that under my instance of the program. But anyone in street outreach and emergency shelter pretty much is using this because this is the way of queuing up their individual and making sure that they're in line for housing.
So would it be possible to track those individuals and their housing placement, say, success to the agency from which they were referred?
So there's kind of two ways to look at coordinated assessment, and this was my philosophy and how we have implemented it. Street outreach and emergency shelters put people on the list. Rapid rehousing, transitional housing, safe haven, permanent supportive housing take people off the list. So and we're seeing a lot of COCs kind of move in that direction. The referral process, the Bridge has hundreds of people who need housing, and maybe 50 of them are over the age of 55, and we know there's 3 resources that specifically. So if they send all 50 people and refer them in emails or whatever mechanism, I've got a queue of 50 people here, and I got 1 bed to give out. Whereas if I turn, and so it would be this many to one relationship that would be very difficult for the agency to manage. So we have centrally managed it where the minute City Square has an empty bed, they go to the list and they just start at the top. And they see, because maybe I'm a vet program, and I just start at the top and I try to for the highest, most vulnerable vet that's in there, and I look and I see who the agency is. I open up HMIS and I see exactly, look at the encounters. Where's that vet? Who was the last person to see him? Get on the phone, email them, and say, I've got a housing unit available. Where is he? Let's start the process and get him in. So that way, it's more of a one-to-one relationship, and so it expedites it. That's just the structure of it.
I totally respect the housing placement. Frankly, I'm interested in assessing the system and the big picture. Are there trends with respect to successful or unsuccessful housing placements or recidivism that can be connected to the legacy of that individual? Did they come from a particular shelter? Did they come from a particular...
I see what you're saying. Is that do some people refer people to housing better? The Coordinated Assessment Center Mother Prioritization completely does not care who the citizen is. It cares on the individual client's vulnerability. What is their vulnerability score? How long have they been homeless? What are their disabilities? So we have literally a matrix of 12 different priority levels. So it's very clear and everyone knows exactly what that is. Yeah. Okay.
I'm just talking about tracking this large number of people that are coming onto the list and then going off the list. Can we track them looking back?
I guess I could, probably, I could dig a little deeper. It's easier for me to say which agencies are housing people faster and housing. In other words, the housing statistic, because that's actually a performance metric. How long does it take you to house somebody from enrollment to residential move-in date, till the key's in the lock? That's easy. But yeah, just to see, I can see who's DOPSing more people. And if you're DOPSing more people, it means you probably have a bigger case management staff in order to conduct that process, and to make sure that, because a documentation priority status means I'm sitting down, doing engaging with you case management, getting your documentation ready, doing all that, scanning it into the HMIS. So that would be something I could measure. I mean, I can literally just go look submitting agency and just give you a number, and I could have my performance analyst do that.
I want the ability for the system to allow analysis on trends. Where we can see, hey, this is really working a lot better than this one. Maybe look at that. So
okay, absolutely.
So, second question was related to Ken's second question about the population of the housing stock. Is sort of the denominator on all the metrics.
That's right.
On the dashboard. Just in round percentages, what percentage of the total housing stock would be Dallas Housing Authority and the limited number of City of Dallas funded housing?
I have to pull it for you. I don't have it memorized.
90%?
No. No. The largest permit supported housing providers are going to be City Square and MetroCare Services, and so, yeah, you've got about 5 programs in City of Dallas. Would be had the largest amount of permit supported housing COC funded.
And are the participants or the facilities that are contributing to that housing stock number, is it growing the time where you're adding them, or is everything that's available in your list? What you said you're doing.
Everything that is dedicated to people experiencing homelessness. In other words, they have to meet that capital H with a line under it, and high vulnerability are on the inventory. But there's people who can private pay, so we have really starting to build that out. That's why we put income on there. Say, well, you know what? This person has $1,200 a month income. Well, if I can find a roommate situation, or we don't say roommate, create a household of 2 people who've been living together in bunks next to each other for years and years. We're starting to figure out other creative ways. Because if everyone just sits on that list waiting for a subsidy that's going to be at 100% occupancy here in another month, they're just going to sit there. We've got to get very creative secondary housing markets, and we have to that's what the coordinated assessment my housing people are in charge with, is to help figuring out other housing solutions.
Okay. So last question is more policy related, and for me it springs from the fact that HUD has specified in the data entry requirements, a few weeks ago it was updated, that there's no requirement that agencies adopt the HMI application that is used by the COC. Individual agencies can use all of their own applications as long as the data is uploaded consistent with the requirements. And so New York City is a perfect example of that with the data warehouse. There are hundreds of systems that different providers are using, but they are all uploading data from their applications, which is, in most cases, not the HMIS application that COC uses. But it eliminates the need for each individual agency to change the system that they are using to use. So why is Dallas different? Why is there a mandate that each of the agencies, why are we pushing IRIS down to the next level?
I'm not completely understanding all the performance metrics measures in HUD have a assessment, intake form. Your basic demographics, your need, your disability, all the different things that we want to know about you that could be then related to your needs. So that is consistent. Now, applications for housing.
No, application, I'm talking about software, a program. Not where you're filling an application. I'm talking about an application, the different software that the agencies are using to capture their data to fit their uses, and then uploading data in the format specified by HUD, which is a.
And so you're asking me, why does someone do, when we did our monitoring of COC fund, I'm just going to go because that's, where I have a particular jurisdiction. We asked every agency to, have prepared for us, I want to see your paper, your individual program, intake form, agreements, behavior agreements. I wanted to see everything to get that. And so we've only had our first shot to see what are the different ways and different applications. Some communities, and I think it's on one of our permanent housing committee, the Continued Care Assembly, we've talked about that because I've gone to several sessions where they have a unified application, like a housing application, right? It's just one application regardless, COC, project-based.
We're not talking about something. I'm talking about the system that the agencies are using.
I've never sat down with an agency and watched them enter into a separate system for a housing application. I've never witnessed that.
Okay, I'm sorry I use the application. That's the term that HUD uses. But I'm talking about if agency X was using any of the number of computer applications, the software that was available.
ETO, that's one that several Promise Houses uses ETO.
They were collecting information, but that agency is now required to adopt IRIS as its own system, rather than simply uploading the data in the CSV format that is specified by HUD to a warehouse or directly into IRIS. And so
I'm sure it's a matter of planning, money. I mean, all the HMIS systems are proprietary, and they don't just, oh, sure, open up the back end and I will allow for import exports. I mean, there is a certain proprietary nature to just developing and selling software. I think that and I heard that this morning, why can't I just API and it'll automatically all populate? Well, maybe someday that might be possible with the system. The single HMIS system is to benefit the client, that if everyone is using the same system, we can see the client, because especially in our cohort, they move from agency to area. And if I can see that from my instance, where this client is and where they're moving and what they're doing, I think I can better provide services. So why people use DO2 systems, why didn't, I think Boston does they have like 4 different systems in their data warehousing system, and it is very complex, especially when you look at the different array of aggregate reports that they have to provide to HUD. And I know that they're like going, can't we just get one system? And when we were in San Francisco, they literally just decided to call their HMIS system the one system, just because it just made better sense to do planning and to deal with this issue of homelessness. So I guess I just don't have an answer to your question.
So just make sure I understand the question and the answer. So is the requirement that individual agencies use Pieces IRIS internally, so to speak, and not just uploading data to the system, was that a policy decision by MDHA, or is that a technical requirement?
We have never told, if you want to use client track for this and this for this, all I know is that for your funding and your homeless response stuff, it needs to be in IRIS. You can use a lot of them. Some people do have HR software. Several agencies, double entry by choice. And we would hope that we can continue to improve a system where they're going, you know what, I am unplugging that old system because I'm seeing so much value to the single system. I mean, that's the job of IRIS, improving the product and everything we do. We don't require that you unplug your other systems, but for emergency shelter, street outreach, and your permanent sort of housing, the clients that are in the system. And that is contractually part of HUD. But we can't force you not to use another system if you want to, but you do need to use this. So if you want to use a secondary system for other purposes, or use that as your primary, use this as a secondary. We still have requirements for data entry, of 5 business days of an interaction or enrollment and exit. And so it requires a lot of work to do that. And hopefully our product will continue to be so good that they're eventually going to unplug those and migrate over to just use a single system.
Okay, so we're out of time for this. I think Mr. Cruz has asked for an additional meeting to talk on things on a technical level. Maybe Mr. McManaman and others who have an interest in that can participate. So. All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Crane.
Thank you.
So I want to back up a minute to agenda item number 5. Ms. Mendelson joined the meeting at the beginning of Ms. Crane's presentation, and just want to take a moment to congratulate her. She's been appointed by the City Council as Vice Chair of this commission. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we're going to move to the City of Dallas Office Homeless Solutions presentation. Ms. Sharp, is that going to be you, or is it
Yes,
Tracy
sir.
Holmes? Okay, Ms. Sharp.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you are aware, we have to take agenda items to council for approval in relation to our contracts. And so we wanted to give you an update as it relates to the item that will be scheduled for December 13th. And so on your agenda, you will see that we have items related to the Bridge Management Service contracts and Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance. We are going to continue contract negotiations with MDHA, with Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance, so it will not be on the December council agenda. That's going to be moved to January agenda, but we'll be able to give you a more detailed update as it relates to those terms at your next meeting.
On the 15th.
Correct,
Right.
on the December 15th. And so today we'll talk about the agenda item related to the bridge that will occur on December 13th. And so that's the purpose of this briefing. It's definitely related to the management services contract that's being restated and amended with the bridge, as well as adding funding that's allocated for the FY17-18 fiscal year, and then of course asking the City Council for authorization to execute a management services contract for this fiscal year. Next slide. So just for a little background, the initial agreement with the bridge, which is on slide 3, was December of 2007, and it expired in September of 2015. And that agreement allows for up to 2 renewals, 2 5-year renewals. And so the first 5-year renewal, we're in the first 5-year renewal, which was signed in October of 2015. And then expires in September 2020. So we are in that renewal, and we'll be aligning that with the city's fiscal year, those amendments that we have. And there will be an option for the next renewal. And so going on to the next slide, what I would give a quick overview on are the original terms that were stated in the agreement that will be restated in the agreement for this fiscal year, and then additional amendments that have occurred since that original agreement, and then new provisions or enhanced modifications that will be included. And so you'll notice that the original agreement, city provided funding for the operations of the bridge, so the city owns the facility. Bridge Steps is the formal name. They operate the facility. We can go to the next slide. Okay, next slide. We include funds, some which is general funds as well as public dollars. So we have our Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs funding. It mentions, next slide, please. Okay, I think you all have it in front of you as well. But so it also includes requirements as it relates to which the Bridge Steps has to have utilities in their name, and the terms as it relates to default. And so in the amendments, beginning in FY16 is when we applied the requirement as it relates to HMIS applying to all funding. So that's on slide 7. And then in FY17, we revised the scope of services where we were more specific about the performance outcomes. So how many folks do you propose to serve in your night shelter? How many folks will you serve in your day shelter? And then how many do you expect to be placed into housing? And so on to slide 8 is where these are the proposals that we want to include in this fiscal year's recommendation or recommended contract, are clarifying what the service expectations are, the outcome expectations, the financial expectations, as well as the data expectations. And so as it relates to service expectations, we want to look at making sure that the bridge continues to be an immediate and low barrier, has immediate and low barrier access, that is client-centered, housing-focused, be very clear on what it looks like to be a good neighbor. And so we're having meetings with them, talking about what that looks like to improve just the relationship, not only with the surrounding community, but the individuals that may be considered sheltered adverse. We're also specifying, including more information or details in the contracts about outcomes, not only looking at housing placements and how many folks you're serving, but also what is the average length of stay, and is there, what can be done to reduce that? And of course, we know affordable housing and, permanent supportive housing is definitely going to be one of those that impact that, but there may be other ways that are best practices to reduce it from a program design standpoint. And then looking at the returns in homelessness. So how many of those folks that are in the system, individuals that were housed and then came back? And so we're increasing terms that specify that and having conversations about how to track that so we can be able to report the effectiveness of the funds that are provided. On the next slide, it discusses the next steps. So we've come to you on today. We will brief the Human and Social Needs Committee by memorandum on December 4th, and then it's scheduled to go to council on December 13th.
So will this commission receive a draft of the agreement?
Yes, sir. We will provide a draft contract before it's executed, because we wanted to bring this to you, but we also are negotiating terms with the bridge. We wanted to be able to give them time as well to provide feedback, but you always have a draft as agreed by the city attorney's office before execution.
Okay, it'll be executed before our next meeting, so
Correct.
If commission members have comments and questions.
I have a question. So, because we're a new commission and new reporting, I'm not really sure exactly how detailed this report is and how much it really mirrors the contract. Mm-hmm. But my question is, how can the additional modified terms include words like increased and reduced when you're trying to specify outcomes? So that seems so general and so subjective. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if you're saying it this way to us as just a briefing of this is in general what we're talking about, or are there really specific measures in place?
Yes, there will be specific measures. So for instance, when you say what's the reduction in average length of shelter stay, they could evaluate what is the average length of stay right now, and then say we are going to, we plan to reduce that length of stay by X percentage. So those will be specific outcomes that are a part of the scope of services in the final contract.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And when do you anticipate being able to distribute the draft to us?
It definitely would be the week after Thanksgiving. So the week of November 27th, I'll follow back up with you to get a specific date, but we definitely want to make sure we give you more time to review and be able to give us your feedback individually by email.
Okay. Or if commission members want to give their comments and questions to me, I'll be happy to collect those and communicate with you.
Great.
So, yes, Mr. Headley.
When would the contract begin after you're done negotiating?
So the effective term, it aligns with the fiscal year beginning October 1. There is one funding source from the state that has a term begin September 1, but the general funds that are associated with it have an October 1 term until October 1 of 2017, and then to September 30th, 2018.
So it's already started.
So once the contract is executed, eligible expenses that have been incurred beginning October 1 are eligible for reimbursement.
Commissioner, question.
Yes.
Charlotte, so will these additional modified terms and sort of the expectations and outcomes, are those things that are looked at on a yearly basis, or is there a monthly reporting process that sort of gives you at least a guide on where the bridge is on meeting some of these expectations?
Yes, so there are monthly reports. With every request for payment, there is supporting performance data with the financial expenditures.
Is that something you could share with this commission, maybe on a bi-yearly basis, or?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
As requested, we can provide updates.
Okay, thank you.
Question? Yes. Question.
Can you go into any clarification of how the good neighbor policy is going to be negotiated? What exactly is the process there?
Yes, so the dialogue we've had thus far is determining a certain radius around their facility where there will be some targeted street outreach and maintenance. And so they're already doing that, probably about within a block from their facility. And so we want to be able to expand that. And so that's what the negotiation will be, is how do you expand that radius? What capacity needs will they have? But then also what will be the minimum expectations as it relates to a good neighbor? We know they have some agreements with local nearby businesses, but there are other ways that, you can be a good neighbor. And so if you have any recommendations, we'll make sure that's part of the.
I would recommend, just as someone who lives nearby, maybe reach out to the neighborhood associations that are peripheral to the bridge. There's Downtown Dallas Neighborhood Association, Farmers Market, of course the Cedars, and I think that would be it. Did West End? No? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, other questions about the bridge?
So my last question is, do you anticipate that this will increase, decrease, or not necessarily change funding for the bridge?
For the actual contract, the allocation has already been made for this fiscal year. And so those are the conversations that we're having about, if it may impact how they do their program design based on needs that will be required because of the modifications.
So are all of the items where there's a penalty for not performing, are there also bonuses for exceeding expectations?
There aren't any bonuses because it's an expectation of the contract. The penalty would be, if you're in default because with any of the contract terms, that could impact payment. And it also could impact, continuing on with the contract depending on what is violated.
Okay, thank
you. You were in the meeting we were in this morning, so
yes,
this
sir.
may be but we were talking about one possibility about the shelter staying open longer during the day. Is that, so what I'm trying to figure out is if you make these changes, is that something that could go into the contract, or if it doesn't go into the contract, does that hinder our moving forward with that request of them?
So the bridge is one of the few facilities that has a day shelter. They provide day services. So those shelters that are making their folks leave earlier, most of them are busing them to the bridge.
Okay, are there other questions about the bridge contract? Yeah, Mr. Headley.
And I'm still a little confused. Is it a common practice that the bridge is signing a contract that after it's already started? That just doesn't make sense to me. Like, you're going to continue negotiating, but it started October 1. So are they being withheld funds? Or how does that work since you're still in negotiations?
Right. So funding isn't being withheld, but we can't provide any funds without a contract that's executed. And so so the funding is allocated, goes to council for approval. Any costs that have been, if council chooses to authorize execution, any costs that the bridge have incurred that are consistent with the requirements of the contract, they can request reimbursement for those expenses and be reimbursed by it. It is not a common practice. But we did think that it was important to be able to restate the original terms as well as the additional terms that should be included. But our goal, even moving forward, is to make sure that we don't have, an interruption in services and that we can begin contracts or have them executed prior to the fiscal year.
But if the negotiations went on long enough, there could be issues there funding-wise with the bridge. Wouldn't you think? I mean, like if it stretched on, if y'all just didn't come to an agreement.
Yes.
But aren't you operating under, there is an existing contract you're operating under that's being restated, so.
No, the contracts ended at the end of the fiscal year, so in September. So we are now working on the contract for FY 17-18.
Chair Webb, if I may interject, and my apologies for my voice, I'm getting over laryngitis. Nadia Chandler-Hardy, Chief of Community Services. If I may add and expound to Ms. Sharp's response to your question, the City of Dallas is negotiating in good faith with Bridge Steps. We have asked them to continue services, but we have been directed to halt on executing the new contract due to the HMIS integration exercise that we went over through this past month. So in an effort to be more streamlined in terms of how we go about validating the data that is entered into HMIS and then processing those reimbursements based on the validated data that is entered into that system, we want to make sure that we worked with the bridge very closely to ensure that that integration took place, that we validated that data, we provided those reimbursements that dated all the way back, I believe, to April or March. And so we wanted to make sure that we got that over with and done before we begin to execute a new contract. And so this new contract will ensure that we have those expectations outlined and itemized so that everyone is on the same page and we know what we are expecting of each other. We typically don't try to execute contracts while we're into the new operating fiscal year, but this is one exception. But we are negotiating in good faith, and we believe we'll get there and have the contract executed and be able to process those reimbursements for first quarter fiscal year. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Well, just negotiation-wise, I can't imagine having to move forward like that. Business-wise, I would be very upset just having those things dragged on like that. But no, hopefully, you guys get it all figured out fairly soon.
I'm confident we will. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Henry.
What's in place to make sure that the contract is executed and negotiated next year for the next contract period so that they don't fall behind, so we're not in the same situation next time?
Glad you asked that question, and that will be outlined in the new contract. What we would like to do and anticipate doing is really kind of lining everything up alongside our 2-year budget planning cycle, so that as we are gearing up for our own internal financial planning, that we're also including partners such as the bridge in that exercise. And so that will be outlined in the agreement, and there's that automatic trigger that as we gear up for the new budget, that we also gear up for any amendments or changes or renewals to the contract. And that's just a cleanup policy that's happening across the city organization. Unfortunately, it's not an exception just for here, but across the entire city organization. We're looking at how we best align all of our contract renewals, and it's something that our city council and our city manager has made very clear that we wish not to see this type of out of cycle negotiating taking place, that we conduct all of our business within that planning season.
Other questions?
Just out of curiosity, when was the last contract signed? I mean, how much time has it been between contract execution?
The contract ended September 30th.
Whichever the last one was.
2017.
Yeah, this is just curiosity.
Oh, you're saying when was the actual contract executed?
When was the, yeah.
The execution date, I believe it was in February.
So along those lines, I'm confused about the second bullet on slide 3 that says we're currently operating under a contract from October 1/15 to September 30, 2020. What does that refer to?
So there's a renewal agreement, and then within that renewal agreement period, each fiscal year, we amend the agreement to include whatever funding that's allocated during that fiscal year. Does that make sense? So for instance, so council allocates during budget time for each year, which now will be on a biennial basis. And so all of the funding isn't tied. We don't put a lump sum of funding on 5 year for the 5-year renewal in one agreement. So each budget term, then we allocate funding under an amendment.
Okay, so the 5-year agreement is an umbrella agreement that contemplates agreement on specific terms each year when funding is authorized. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Okay. Other questions? Mr. Headley.
All right, so the last one, it ended in October 2016, or excuse me, end of September.
2017.
And then the new contract was signed in February, so it took from October 1 to February to get that contract done.
Correct.
But we're confident that's not going to happen this time.
No.
It's only going to go like weeks instead of months or
yes, and we
quarters.
I actually met with the bridge on yesterday, and so we even planned that timeline out to make sure that even before it goes to council, once and if council approves, then we're just ready to route it through the rest of the city so that contract execution won't take long upon approval.
So going forward, when council moves to adopt their fiscal budget, there will also be the related items to all the necessary contracts with the dollar amounts, the funding that's allocated. So it's one single vote for everything loaded in the budget. And that is the opportunity that we missed this fiscal year, but we're planning that will not happen again.
Other questions on this process or the bridge contract? Okay, thank you, Ms. Sharp. Ms. Hardy? So let's move on to subcommittee reports. I'll comment briefly on the site selection guideline subcommittee. Mr. Hamilton was called out of town, was not able to make it. The purpose of this subcommittee, which we established last month, is to give feedback to Charlotte on the site selection criteria that the Office of Homeless Solutions is proposing to the City Council. And what Ted has done is he's consulted with permanent supportive housing experts at City Square and MDHA, and he's begun to develop a scoring system that will result in the assignment of scores to individual criteria and an overall score for a site. Kind of overlay on those criteria and perhaps as well develop some recommendations on the criteria themselves. And he anticipates circulating his proposals to the rest of the subcommittee within the next day or so. And then hopefully we'll be able to meet, they will be able to meet at the beginning of next week, because you have a deadline of Wednesday of next week in order to get our feedback to take to the City Council. So Mr. Hamilton is out of town, but he is working on that, and if you're a member of his subcommittee, you should expect to hear from him on that very soon. Ms. Middleton, would you tell us where things stand on the short-term solutions subcommittee?
Sure. Well, we had a meeting, 3 out of 4 of us, and it was good. We went over the items that we talked about as short-term solutions at our last commission meeting, and we have funneled it down to a couple of items. And these are what they are. To pursue open city buildings, garages, provide secure outdoor sleeping space and services, and Chad was going to take the lead on that. Work with the 5 largest shelters to expand existing capacity and make incremental changes to keep people later in the morning. I think I'm going to take the lead on that one. Provide more public hygiene stations, toilet, shower. We also talked about needle waste and pet waste as possibles. And possibly adding land for specific feeding with trash and security. And Casey and I were going to work on that. He came as a guest and stepped up to the plate, so thank you. And a plan to develop the adoption program with the faith community, and Mark's going to take the lead on that one. We've removed one of the items that we talked about, which was discouraging panhandling, because we're giving a good shout out to another commission. So we have, here we go, the human is, no we don't, where is it? Yeah, there we go. So you have in your packet the Give Right Dallas program, and I think they are very well positioned to take care of that. So we're just taking that off our plate altogether, although there was a slash with that item which included the feedings that we're not giving up. So that's where we're at, and then at our next commission meeting we're hoping to have some very specific things to talk about.
Okay, would you anticipate making a proposal that includes all the things you're working on, or maybe some that...
I think some will flesh out sooner than others.
Okay, great.
Our next subcommittee meeting, we're intending to invite the 5 largest homeless providers to join us in a discussion about expanding the capacity and what that would look like for them, as well as some of those kind of incremental changes that we think would affect quality of life for both people experiencing homelessness and the community. And our intent is to give the providers those questions and information up front of what we're going to look for, so they can come very prepared and we can have a really productive meeting.
Okay, and are you discussing with the Office of Homeless Solutions issues that may relate to potential funding for some of these?
Yes, so we've already sort of said, hey, we're going to need some money if we were going to implement any of these recommendations. So I think that's on their radar. And then we also, I just want to give you a nice shout out, have gotten some big overtures of support in terms of being able to take on some of the work behind the scenes that we asked them to do for us. So.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right. So back to Ms. Sharp with the briefing memorandum on the human and social needs feedback on the evaluation criteria. You have additional information on the...
I just wanted to share that you do have a memo as well as the briefing that was provided to human and social needs, giving your feedback, as well as the briefing that was given by Opportunity Dallas. They also had recommendations on opportunity areas, and so the commission or the Human and Social Needs Committees recommended that in the recommendations on site evaluation to consider some of those factors as well. Another comment that's included on the briefing memo is that it was recommended that instead of going with the 80 score for the multi-tenant inspections, it was recommended that we only choose sites that score 90 or better. And so that also is, I know, being discussed or at least thought about with the subcommittee that's evaluating those.
Okay, when developing your criteria, did you consult with this Opportunity Dallas and others who've been focused on the high opportunity areas, et cetera?
We did not consult with the Opportunity Dallas. We did.
No, I mean the report of it.
With the report?
Yes.
No, that briefing actually was on the same day as mine. So it just so happened that they aligned in that way. And so that was a natural segue for the commission or the committee to be able to say, oh, that's great. Consider some of what they said and what you're discussing. And so that's why we thought it was important to give you both briefings so that as you continue to think about it, you look at that report and see how we could, are there any components that we should model and consider.
Okay. And there is a link in the briefing slides from Opportunity Dallas to their full report on the framework. And on slide 13 of the briefing, opportunitydallas.org/the framework. And that is a lengthier report on housing issues. It goes beyond homelessness. It gets into affordable housing, et cetera. But it's a very thorough report, and I would recommend it to the other commission members if you have the time to look at that as well, because I think it's instructive to our work. So, All right. Any other business from the commissioners? If not, we are almost on time, which for us is a vast improvement over our last meeting. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? Seconded. All in favor? All right. Any opposed? Thank you very much. We are adjourned.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.